It would be one of the most complex machines ever built. It would take 10,000 people and nearly 5 years to build it. It would cost an estimated $5 billion. Success was anything but certain. The plane would contain more than 4 million parts, supplied by contractors around the world. But would they arrive on time?
Miss your first commitment and then things start to go wrong.
And would they work?
From a technical point of view, I would not put this back on the airplane if I had a choice.
Nothing could be left to chance.
154.
This would be the most tested airliner in aviation history. Eventually, lives would be at stake.
There's an apprehension anytime you change technology.
To make it all work, the company would reinvent itself from the inside out. And all of this would have to happen at a time when the world's airline industry was in recession. If the 777 were to fail, the company's future was at risk. Success would keep Boeing ahead of the competition for decades to come. This plane would be built to set a new standard for commercial aviation. This is the story of the building of a 21st century jet.
I'm sorry.
300 people are boarding a flight from London to Washington, D.C. It's actually an inaugural flight, although most of these people didn't know it when they bought their tickets.
This just happened to be the day we needed to go back to Washington, and the secretary made the flight. I don't think she knew it was the inaugural flight, so just pure coincidence.
This is the first commercial flight by United Airlines of a brand new airliner, the Boeing 777. The chances are that anyone who travels to Europe or Asia will sooner or later fly in the 777, as this plane replaces the older 747s on many overseas flights. It's Boeing's 7th new airliner, and the company has staked its future on it. In economic hard times for the airline industry, Boeing hopes the 777 will keep the company prosperous well into the 21st century.
To put it on, flip it over your head.
But the investment and the risk are enormous. For the last 3 years, we've been following the process of designing, manufacturing, and testing the world's largest and newest twin-engine airliner. It's cost an estimated $5 billion. Boeing needs to sell 200 or so planes at roughly $100 million apiece before the company will consider the plane a success. Back in mid-1992, Boeing began assembling and training the 10,000-strong team whose excitement and disappointments would punctuate the complex process of plane making.
How are you?
A key figure in this drama was Alan Mullally, the 777 director of engineering. He had a boyish charisma, a fierce pride in his company, and he was determined that the new plane would succeed.
Best airplane company in the world.
But in the time since Boeing had developed its last airliner, the aviation industry had changed. It had become harder to hold on to a share of the market.
What's different with the airlines? They have choices. They have choices. They haven't had so many choices before. All except the 747, Airbus has an airplane that can match every one of the Boeing airplanes. So they have choices for the first time in history.
This new competition had come about because of a gap that opened up in the commercial aviation market. The airlines wanted a long-range plane that was smaller than Boeing's 747, So Boeing's two rivals started manufacturing new planes to fill that gap. Airbus with its A330 and 340, and McDonnell Douglas with the MD-11 and 12. The 777 comes somewhere between a 767, a 200-seater, and a 747, which can carry up to 425 passengers. When the company first decided to enter the race, they hoped they could expand the 767 in ways that would satisfy their customers. Boeing took these designs to various airlines. No one was impressed. British Airways, for example, dubbed this a chipolata sausage. In October 1988, the design team met with Boeing's senior executives.
We had, at that time, I think, 7 product scenarios, all focused on a 767 derivative. And at the end of that 5-hour meeting, the simple question was asked, why haven't you looked at a new airplane? And our answer was, we really haven't done it yet. We'll go do the homework. And the next question was, when can we look at some data? And the answer was the last day before Christmas break in 1988. So we went back to our team, which at this time was about 200 people, and said, let's start working on a new airplane.
Boeing had done all this before. From its base in and around Seattle, the company had designed and built 6 different airplanes for the world's airlines. By the end of 1988, they had decided it was time for a 7th, in spite of the huge financial risk this involved. And the risk would increase over the following years as the world moved deeper into economic recession. When President Clinton visited the Boeing plant early in 1993, he reminded the assembled workers of how bad things were for the airline industry.
And it is indeed ironic that the United States, which for so long has led the world in the production of airplanes, has had 3 years in which more money has been lost than was made in the previous history of the airline industry.
The economic situation would prove a constant source of anxiety for the plane makers as they got underway on the 777. Particularly for the executive in charge.
I was a young engineer here in 1969 when 2/3 of the Boeing population left during the period where there was a big sign outside that said, outside of Seattle, that said, last person out, please turn out the lights. That clearly has affected the way I think about organizations and stability of organizations. Be more careful when you're going up, because on the other side of up is always down. We went up way too fast. We weren't efficient in the process, and so when we got to the top, we were way overmanned, and the far side was very steep. Don't want to ever do that again.
To justify the huge investment in the new plane, Boeing needed a launch customer, an airline that would commit to buying a significant number of the new planes in advance. They naturally turned to United Airlines. The two companies had been partners in the early days of commercial aviation.